Hello friends, and welcome back to another Web Developer Path video and to the third part of our PHP videos. So if you've been following my channel, we covered the basics in the first video, and in the second video we covered super globals and form handling and connecting to database using MySQLi. Now in this video we are going to cover the basics of OOP or object-oriented programming. We will also cover connecting to a database using PDO, which is much better than MySQLi, and we will have a quick section about strict types in PHP. All right, let's get started. As usual, I'm using XAMPP to run PHP on my local machine, and I've already installed it, and the Apache server and MySQL is running. So if you're not familiar with this one and how to install it, I go through the installation in the first video, which is linked in the description. And then I've already created the folder in the htdocs called php-pdo, and that's what I have in VS Code opened. And I have just some PHP statements. So we're going to start with object-oriented programming. In general, object-oriented programming model allows us to have cleaner, reusable, more organized, and more secure code. And we can isolate all the functions or properties or attributes that belongs to a class or an object inside a block of code that makes it easier to maintain and more secure. So the two keywords that are very common in object-oriented programming are class and object. So a class is basically a blueprint for an object, and an object is an instance of a class. In PHP, to define a class, we use the class keyword and we give it a name, and by convention it starts with a capital letter. Let's say we have a class of person and a curly brackets. Now inside these curly brackets we will have properties and methods, and we will talk about this in a moment, but this is our class right already. It doesn't have any code within it, but it is our class. Now let's say I want to create an object. Let me make comments here. So this is our class, this is our object, and to create an object from a class we can create a variable. Let's set it to whatever name we want to and assign it to a new person. In this case it is our class, and then use the set of parentheses to instantiate that creation. So this new keyword creates a new object, and we are setting it, or we are saving it inside this person1. So if we var dump person1 here, we will get an object of type person. So this person is an instance of this person class. So we can have as many instances as we want of this person class. So that's how we define a class and how we create an instance of it. Now inside of a class we have properties and methods. So basically properties are variables and methods are functions that are inside of a class. To define a property or a method, we have three access modifiers in object-oriented programming in PHP. We have public, we have private, and protected. So these access modifiers define how a property or a method can be accessed from within the class or outside of a class. Let's just start with public, and we are going to create a name property and set it to some value. Now, since we are already creating our object down here and using var dump to show it on the screen, if we refresh the page, we will get name equal to John. Now, if we want to directly access that name, we can grab the object that we created and use this arrow syntax or arrow symbol and pass the name of that property. In this case is name. Notice there is no $sign because I'm just accessing the property of this object. So let's echo this one and comment this one out, and we will get John, of course. So this is how you can access the properties or methods of an object. Now let's say this name doesn't have a value. If I refresh it, we will get nothing, of course. And we want to set this name to something specific. So we can do the same thing here. I'm going to copy paste this line of code, delete the echo keyword, and set that name to something else. Now name is Mike. So we are able to access this name because it's public. However, if it was private, so I'm going to bring back this private keyword and create an age variable. Let's set it to 30. And let's try to grab the age. So I'm going to say person1 age, and you can see the VS Code is already giving me an error. And if we refresh the site, we will get cannot access private properties. So public properties are accessible from anywhere. So if we create an object, we can access the public properties from anywhere. But with private properties or methods, we can only access them inside their own class. We cannot access them anywhere else. So this private age is only accessible within this block of code. Now we could create a function to access that property, and we can create a public function. Let's give it a name of getAge. It's going to return that age for us. We talked about the scopes in PHP, and this age is inside the scope of this function or method. In this case, it's a method, right? And we need to access this object to grab the age. And in PHP, we have this keyword. This keyword, starting with a $sign, refers to the same object. So if we have a person1 down here, this means person1 age. If we have a person 2, 3 to 10, for example, this would still refer to that particular object. Now, since we are grabbing a property of that object, we again use that arrow syntax, and we say we want to grab the age. So we are returning this age inside this function. Now, instead of calling age directly of this object, we can use the getAge method and invoke it, of course, and refresh the site, we get 30. So the this keyword is quite useful inside the class to access the properties within the same class. Now, similar to private, we have protected. So let's say we have a protected favorite color, and let's set it to red. And with protected properties or methods, we can access them within the same class and the classes that would inherit from this class. When we get to inheritance, we will see an example of this one. But if I try to access this one down here, instead of getAge, I want to get a favorite color, we would get the same error. So cannot access protected properties outside of a class. So this is only available inside this class and the children of this class. So these are the 3 access modifiers that can be used on properties and methods in PHP. All right, let's talk about constructors. A constructor can be used to initialize an object's properties upon creation. Let's say I want to pass this Mike as name when I create this person object, or the age or any other properties that this person might have, because this way can be quite difficult if we have a lot of objects created from this class. So I'm going to delete these 2 lines, and I want to set the name and the age and the favorite color when I create this object. So I'm going to delete that value for favorite color. So I'm going to make a comment, constructor. To define a constructor in PHP class, we can use the same keywords, public function, and I'm using the public keyword to be clear, but by default, functions are public. Now, a constructor function starts with double underscore and the keyword construct. And inside the parentheses of this function, we can accept the parameters that we want to set for our properties. So I want to grab the name, I want to grab the age, and favorite color. So before I do anything with these, I'm just going to echo function ran. We just want to see when this constructor function runs. And down here, I am creating the person object. And let's delete these for a second. We'll cut them out because it will give us an error. And I'm not printing anything except this echo statement. We don't have any print on the screen. So let's refresh this one. We get function ran. If we create more objects of this class, let's say person2, we get function ran 2 times because this function, this constructor function, runs when this class is instantiated. So delete that one, bring back the name, age, and the favorite color, and we want to set this name, age, and favorite color to these parameters. So let's delete this one too and set this name to the name we get from the user. We want to do the same thing for age and favorite color. So let's just change these property names. You can see down here, when we are creating an object, the person is asking for those arguments. And if we delete these parentheses and add them again, you can see VS Code is helping us and telling us what we need. We need a name, let's say Mike. We need an age, let's say 32. And a favorite color, let's say red. So let's bring back this war dump and refresh the site. We get object person, name is Mike, age is 32 and it's private, and favorite color is red. And of course, we could still grab functions or properties that are accessible outside of a class. So we can grab the name by saying person1 name, and let's again comment this out. So we would get Mike, of course. And we can also use the getAge, and we get 32. So this is our constructor function in PHP. Let's talk about inheritance. Let's say this person class is our parent class, and we will have another class that would derive from this class. So inheritance is when a class derives from another class. And when we do that, the child class will inherit all the public and protected properties or methods of the parent class. And of course, the child class can have its own properties and methods. So let's see how it works. So I'm going to keep this parent class as it is, and let's create another class. Let's call it staff. And now we want to inherit from the person class. We have a keyword in PHP, and that is extends, and we want to say what class we want to extend. We want to grab the person class. By doing that, we have access to all of these public and protected properties. So this is a good example to see how we can access this protected property up here. So I'm going to copy this method and paste it inside the staff class. And instead of this age, which you can see it's giving me an error because it's private. So I cannot access the private properties or methods because they are only accessible within that class. But if I change this one to favorite color, the error goes away because even though this is protected, I can access it from the child class. Now down here, let's delete these two lines and create a staff variable, set it to a new staff. And you can see when I provide the parentheses, it asks for the same arguments as we have in the constructor function of the parent class, because we are inheriting all of this and this constructor is public. So we want to set a name. Let's give it a name of maybe 28, and favorite color, let's set it to green. Now on this staff one, I want to call this function. Let's change the name, by the way, I forgot to do that. So get favorite color, and down here we want to say echo staff one and get favorite color. Let's refresh the site, we get green, of course. So even though favorite color is up here in the parent class and it is protected, I can still access it and get it using this function from the child class. Now let's say this staff class has its own properties. So I'm going to create a public role, and I want to set this role when I create my staff class, as well as these parameters. So if I create a constructor class down here and say that I want to grab the role and set this role to the role that I get from the user. So I'm going to delete these two for now. And down here, I'm going to delete this one and all of this. And I'm going to bring back the parentheses. It says it accepts only one role. So let's just give it a role. Let's say staff. Also, let's var dump that staff one. But let's see what we get. We get an object where the name is null, the age is null, and favorite color is null, but the role is a staff. This is not what we want. We want to grab these parameters as well as this role. So in order to extend this constructor, which belongs to our parent, we have a special keyword. We can use the parent keyword. That means we want to access the parent, and use the double colon and call the function that we want to extend. In this case, we want to extend the construct function. In other words, we want to have the construct function as it is and then add our own parameters to it. So we need to grab all of this again and add it here. So now we have 4 parameters. Then inside the construct function of the parent, we want to pass those as arguments. Basically, we are grabbing these as parameters from the user and then passing to this constructor as an argument, which then this function sets those properties from the class instantiation. And now, since we did this, you can see that staff is expecting 4 arguments now. So if I delete all of this again, and you can see now it says name, age, color, and role. So I'm going to copy this, add it down here, and add the role, say manager. So if I var dump staff 1 here, we get name is Mike, age is 32, favorite color is red, and role is manager. So that's about inheritance and how we can extend a class and create a child class from it. Next, we want to talk about class constants. So let's delete this child class, and we're going to keep things simple, and this one and all these arguments too, and all of these properties and methods inside the class. So a class constant is declared inside the class with the const keyword, and they cannot be changed once declared. So to create a constant, we use the keyword, we give it a name, let's say role, and by convention it is all caps, and let's give it a value of manager. So this person by default is going to be manager. Now this is a silly example, but I just want to show you how we can create consts and access them inside or outside of a class. So outside of a class, if we want to access this role, we cannot say, for example, echo person role. This would not work. So let's comment this out, and you can see we get error undefined property role. It doesn't understand this role. Even if I provide the $, it still doesn't understand what is this role we want to access. So the arrow doesn't work for accessing constants. We can use the double colon, the same thing we did for the parent, to access the constructor, and then pass the name of that constant. So if I refresh, we get manager, and notice there is no $sign or anything because this is a constant. So in order to access a constant outside of a class, we use this syntax. Let's say I want to access it inside. So I want to set this to private. And if I refresh, we will get cannot access the private property. Now let's create a public function, call it getRole, and it's going to return that role. Now we cannot use this keyword. We want to grab the role using another keyword, and that is self. This self keyword refers to this class. And on the self keyword, we can provide those double colon, and then we can grab the role. So down here again, we don't want to grab the role directly. We want to use the function getRole, and if we refresh the site, we get manager. That's about class constants and how we can access them outside or inside of a class. Next, let's talk about static properties and methods. So static properties and methods are quite useful because we don't have to create an instance of a class to access them. We can call them directly on the class. So let's delete these two lines and everything inside our class, and I'm going to create a public, a static. So the keyword we use to create a static property or method is the keyword static, and let's give it a name. So I'm just going to call it name and a value of John. Now in order to print this one or access it, we can grab the class name and use the double colon and pass the static property or method we want to access. So in this case, I want to grab name, and notice here we have to add the $sign. Before, when we were using the arrow symbol, we didn't have to do that, but here with the double colon, we have to provide the $sign. So if I refresh this one, we get John, of course. So that's a static property. Let's see an example of a static method. Let's say I have a public static function, and I want to call it getAge, and I actually want to calculate the age of the person by accepting the age. So in this case, I'm going to accept a parameter, and let's say birth year. So I'm going to accept the birth year parameter from the user, and then create an age variable inside the function, set it to date. So this is the date function, and I'm just going to grab the year. This will give me the current year. In this case, is 2023, and subtract that from the birth year. And then I just want to return a string that says this name is this year old. Because we are inside a static function, we cannot use the this keyword anymore. But instead, we can use the self keyword again, much like with constants, and use the double colon and grab the property we want to access. In this case, we want to grab the name. And I just want to concatenate some text here. So is age. Basically, I want to get John is 32, 35, 36, depending on the birth year that the user passes in. So let's change this name to getAge. So we use the class name, a double colon, and then the function. And the function is asking for a birth year. So let's say 1987, and refresh the site, we get John is 36. So if we change this one to 1995, for example, we get 28. But you can see how easily we can just call a function of the class itself. We don't have to create an instance of it. So that is about static methods and properties in PHP. All right, next I want to talk about abstract classes and methods. An abstract class is a class that cannot be instantiated, and an abstract method is a method that does not have implementation. So let's see it in example. I want to delete everything here and the body of the class. So we have an empty class here, and I just want to add an abstract keyword before the class keyword. So this is now an abstract class. Let's try to instantiate it. So I want to create a new person, set it to that new person abstract class. Let's var dump that p, and we will get an error that says cannot instantiate abstract class person. So let's say I have an abstract method inside this class. So I want to say abstract public function, and let's call it greet, and I want to implement it and add the code using this curly brackets, but you can see it's giving me an error and it says method body not allowed. So abstract methods cannot have an implementation. Abstract classes and methods are quite useful when you want to have different implementation for the same method. Let's see a simple example of this one. Let's say we have this person abstract class. We want to create a public name, and also I want to have a constructor for this one. So I want to say public function, and we already know how to do this. Construct, we want to grab the name and set this name to the name that we get from the user. And down here, instead of public, I want to change this to protected. This person class, for example, is a general class or a blueprint for another class. So let's say I have another class down here, and let's call it staff, and it's going to extend the person abstract class. As soon as I do this, you can see VS Code is telling me that staff, this class, does not implement the method greet. So when we extend an abstract class, all the abstract methods inside of that class must be implemented inside the child class. So we need to actually implement this function down here. So let's add the keyword public here. We don't have to, but just to be clear, and then implement it. So now we have to add the implementation here. So I want to say, hello, my name is this name. So we want to grab the this name. We can do that because we are extending that class, and this is a public name. So even if it was protected, we could do it. And I am, let's say I want to say staff. So I want to get that dynamically. So I can chain a method here, get class, and pass this. So remember, this keyword refers to the same object. In this case is class. So this is asking for an object to give us the name. So it would give us staff. So this is one class. So let's say I have another class. I want to call it manager, and it's going to implement the greet function again. But this time I want to say, hi, I am the name, your manager. It should say manager because the name of the class is manager. And down here, let's create two objects. One is going to be staff, so new staff, and it will ask for the name because we have a constructor on the abstract class. So let's say Mike, and then let's create another object for the manager and set it to a new manager, and let's give the name Sarah to this one. And I'm going to echo the staff greet function, also the manager greet function. And before I refresh the site, I'm just going to add two break lines here, so they would be on different lines. All right, let's refresh the site and see what we get. My name is Mike and I'm staff, and we are getting that from this function. And the manager greet function says, hi, I'm Sarah, your manager. So this is what I mean by being able to implement the same function in different ways using this abstract keyword. Next, I want to talk about interfaces that are quite similar to abstract classes, but there are few differences. So interfaces have few differences with abstract classes. Now, first, in order to create an interface, we use the interface keyword and then use the name just like classes. By convention, it starts with a capital letter. Let's say I want to give it a name of person again. So let's comment this out so it doesn't give us an error. So an interface cannot have properties. With an abstract class, we were able to create a property here, but if I add this public name, you can see it's giving me an error. VS Code doesn't exactly tell us what's the error, but it is an error, and it's because we cannot have properties inside an interface. That's one difference. The other one is that all the functions inside an interface must be public. If I create a protected function, you can see again it's giving me an error and it says interface methods must be public. So we need to make sure that the interface methods all are public. And by default, all the methods inside an interface are abstract. And that's why when we added the keyword abstract before, it gave us an error. You can see the modifier abstract is not allowed because they are abstract. That means if I try to implement this function here, it's going to give me an error. Like you see here, it says method cannot have a body. So these are the differences between an interface and an abstract class. But the good thing about interfaces is that you can implement it on a class that already has a parent class. So for example, up here, we are extending a class person. Now let's say I want to implement the interface as well. So in fact, let's bring back this person. Let's change this to role. So we want to have a role, and instead of greet, which is the same function we have here, let's create another function and set to role. And now we want to use this interface for our staff and manager classes. So we can do that by using the keyword implements. So we want to implement the role interface, and again, as soon as we do this, we get an error that we are not implementing the role method. So just like the abstract method from our abstract class, we have to implement this role or any other function from our interface. I'm just going to copy paste this one and change this to role. And this time, just want to say, for example, name role is a staff. So we are getting the class name, right? So let's do the same thing for the manager class. We want to implement the role interface. Now we need to grab the role function and give it a body. So we need to say what this one is going to do. Maybe this time we will say Sarah is your boss, because we know we are inside the manager class, so we know this is the boss. So let's print or echo the role function instead of the greet and see what we get. We get Mike's role is a staff because of this, and we get Sarah is your boss. So you can see the similarities between an interface and an abstract class. However, there are also those three differences that I mentioned. We cannot have properties, the methods must be public, and they are abstract by default. So that's about interfaces and all the topics that I wanted to cover for the basics of object-oriented programming in PHP. Next, we want to use PDO or PHP data objects to connect to a database and communicate with that database. All right, so to start with databases, let's go to phpMyAdmin. So I'm going to go to localhost and go to phpMyAdmin, and let's first create a database. I deleted all the databases that I had before because I wanted to have a fresh start. So let's create a database by going to databases tab and give it a name. I want to call it DemoDB, and let's just create. This will ask for the first table name we want to create. Let's call it post with 4 columns, create, and let's give those columns a name. So the first one is going to be ID, second one is going to be title, third one is going to be body, and the last one is going to be created_at. For the ID, we are going to use int, and everything is going to be default, but we're going to check this auto increment, and this will make the index primary for us. And we want it to be the primary key, so that means we don't want it to be repeated. For the title, we're going to use varchar and set to 150, for example, no more than 150 characters. For the body, I'm going to choose text and set the length to empty. Created@, we want to use date time like this, or we can even just use date, whichever you want. And for the default, we want to say current timestamp, so this day and time, and let's just press save. So our table is created. Let's insert some data into the table so we have something when we read from the database. Let's say post 1, and I'm just gonna copy some lorem text and add it here and also down here. So this is the second post. So let's say post 2 and press go down here. So 2 rows inserted, and we didn't have to, of course, provide the ID or the created@ because they are being filled by default. So we have post 1 and post 2. All right, let's go back to the home page on phpMyAdmin and go to the users, because we need a user to connect to the database. You can use root, which has no password, but I'm going to create a new user for this one, and I'm going to call it demo_user. The host name is going to be local, so it's going to be localhost. The password is going to be 321321 for me. You can choose any password, or you can leave it empty. And make sure you give all the privileges to this user and then press go. So you have added new user, demo user at localhost. All right, so the information we need to connect to a database is the database name, the username, the password, and the localhost or the host, which is local for us. So PDO or PHP data objects is a way to connect to a database in PHP. So in the previous video, we used MySQLi, which is only able to connect to MySQL databases. But with PDO, we can connect to different types of databases like MySQL, Oracle, Postgres, SQLite, and some others. So it has more benefits over MySQLi, and it has a better security as well. So for this one, I'm going to use the markup that we had in the previous video. So this is in my GitHub repo, and I will leave the link to this particular page in the description. So we want to grab this markup, which is just HTML, and back to the project, I'm going to delete everything on this page and paste that one. So save it, refresh, we get this one. I'm using Tailwind CSS, and that's why the styles are already there. All right, so let's create a config PHP file so we can have our database configuration here. Now, PDO uses a data source name to connect to a database. So let's open our PHP tag here, and I'm going to make a comment, data source name or DSN. So we are going to create our DSN here, and also all the information that we need to connect to a database. We need our DB server, let's say DB host instead of server. So we need our DB host, and we're going to set it to localhost. We are working on a local host, and I'm going to copy paste this a few times. We need the DB user, we need the DB pass, and the DB name. For the user, I called it demo user. For the pass, I used 321321, and the name is a demo DB. Now our DSN is going to be a string. The first parameter, or the first part, is the driver or the database we want to connect. In this case is MySQL. And then we have a colon, and then we need to provide the host. So the host name in this case for us is DB underscore host, and then a semicolon. And then we need the DB name, which is going to be DB underscore name right here. And that's it. And we can have other options here like the char set and some other parameters, but this is enough for us to connect to a database. And in fact, we don't need this semicolon here because it's the last argument. So you could pass these as a string. So just add this localhost down here, but I prefer to keep it like this, which is much cleaner, and you can change it easily if you want to. So we want to try to connect to our database now. So let's create our connection variable, and this is going to be an object, in fact, and we are going to create a new PDO. So we are going to instantiate the class PDO, and this one asks for DSN, which we've already created, then the username, so DB underscore user, and then the password, so DB underscore password. So we want to see if this is connected, then show us something. So tell us it's connected. Otherwise, give us an error. So we can wrap this inside a try catch block. So let's move this down here. And if it is successful, I'm just going to echo connected. For the catch block, I'm going to leave it empty for now. Now let's include or require this file inside our index, otherwise it's not going to work. So open and close our PHP tags up here and just require config PHP. We could use include, but this is a requirement for the application to work, so I'm just using the required keyword. So let's refresh the site and we get connected. So we are successfully connecting to the database. But let's change the password, so we would get an error, and refresh the site. We get nothing because we left this empty. Now, we could grab the exception class and then instantiate an instance of it inside this catch block and just say echo E. So that's one way, and we get PDO exception. But by convention, we could also set the attributes on this connection, which is our object. So we can set attributes on this object. So we have a set attribute function. This one takes the attribute mode we want to change. So PDO attr underscore error mode, and then the value, again PDO. This case we want to get error mode exception. So we want to set the error mode to exception. And you notice we are using the class name and then double colon and these keys or these properties. And these are actually constants from the PDO class. So if we go to the documentation and click on this PDO, this would give us the class which has a bunch of constants and methods and properties. And that's how we are able to grab these constants using this double colon, which we talked about it already. This should not change anything, but I'm just going to change get message method to this E object, which is a PDO exception. Now, instead of a regular exception, I'm just going to create a PDO exception and be specific about the PDO. And now it says access denied on this user. Again, this is not changing anything, we are just being specific. So this is one of the benefits of PDO. We can set and change the attributes of the connection. Let's say I want to change the default fetch mode. So I want to grab the data by default as an object. So again, I'm going to grab the connection. So what we did up there, so I'm going to set attribute. This time I want to grab another constant, and this one is attr underscore default fetch mode. So that's the key, and the value for that is going to be PDO fetch object. So this means by default, when I fetch data from my database, I want to grab them as an object. All right, so let's change the password to the correct way and refresh. We get connected, but I don't want to see this one. I don't want to see the connected text up there. If it is successful, we are not going to see anything. So we're not getting any error. That means we are connected. So that's how we can connect to a database using PDO. Next, we want to see how we can read from our database. So I'm going to make a comment here, just say read from DB, so it's clear what we're doing. The first thing we need is our query. So I'm just going to create a queue here, or maybe just set it to get queue, so get query, and this is going to be our MySQL query. And we did this in the previous video, so we want to select everything from our posts table. So now we want to grab the results. So I'm going to create another variable, set it to posts, and use the connection that we created up here, so our connection object, and chain a method that is query. Now this query method asks for a query string, and I want to pass this get queue, so get query, and this will give us a PDO statement result. So let's var dump the posts and see what we get. We get an object of PDO statement. Again, back to documentation, we have PDO statement here, and this is another class with bunch of properties and methods. So for example, one of the methods available on this PDO statement is row count. And a row count returns an integer that says if there is any row, that means we have data, we have posts available in our table, and we have 2 posts, that means 2 rows of data. So this is a good function to use when we want to see if there is any data. So let's delete this var dump and go back to our index. And down here we have a section for showing all the posts. We want to make this section, this div, conditional. So we can open our PHP tags and close them, of course, and create an if statement here. So we want to say if posts row count returned anything rather than null, that means it's true, right? If it is true, then show this block of code. So in PHP, we can have a colon after our conditional statements or our loop statement. That means we are not done with it, and whatever goes after it is going to be conditional. But we need to actually end this statement, otherwise it's going to give us an error. Again, I'm going to open and close the PHP tags and say end if. So now this block of code is conditional. That means if this is true, we will see this block of code. But if I negate it, that means it's false. We're not going to see that anymore. So let's add an else block. We want to say if there is no post, let's do something else. So let's say else, again a colon, and let's provide an h3 and says there are no posts. And that's what we get because we negate this condition. All right, let's put it back to the correct way again. We get that one. Now we need to loop over these posts and repeat this block of code for each row in our posts object. So again, I'm going to copy paste this PHP block and add a for each loop and say grab the posts as post, so the singular version, and then end the for each before the else statement. So I'm going to say end for each, and make sure you add the colon here. I forgot. So we want to say I'm not done with this for each and now I'm done. So this block of code needs to be repeated for every row of post in our posts table. So let's see. We get 2, of course. Now we want to change these values to a dynamic data that we get from our database. So let's again open and close PHP tags and echo post title. And notice we are using the arrow syntax here, or the arrow symbol, because we said we want to grab them as an object. So this post is an object, and that's why we can grab it like this. So if I save and refresh the site, we get post 1 and post 2. Now, we talked about security, and security is very important when it comes to server-side languages. We need to wrap this within an HTML special characters. We want to make sure that even if there is any script written to our database, it's not going to be executed on the browser side. So we are going to repeat this PHP, and in fact, I'm going to set it on a new line, and let's copy it and add it after the posted on. So we want to change post title to created at, and we're going to do the same thing again for the body. So we just changed this title to body. Of course, we get post 1 posted on this date and post 2 on this date. So before we get into writing to the database, I just want to show you that we can override this fetch mode when we are getting our posts. So back in our index, we are grabbing the posts as an object, but I can chain another method and change the mode. So we can use the fetch all method, and this would ask for the mode, right? And by default is the fetch default, which means object because we changed the default. So let's say I want to change the mode to PDO : fetch associate. So ASSOC, that means associate, it's gonna grab an associative array. If I do this one, all of this will give me an error. Let's refresh. Because we are trying to access the properties of an object, but this is no longer an object, it is an associative array. So we need to use the array syntax. So if I comment these out and change this one to brackets and then pass the key, which is title in this case, and refresh, we get post 1 and post 2. So I have to do this same thing for all of these down here. But I personally prefer the object syntax because it is much cleaner and easier to read, in my opinion. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy this one, but set it back to the way it was. So we get the same thing. But inside the config file, I'm going to make a comment and add that post fetch all as PDO fetch. So when you get this from GitHub, you will have this as a reference. If you want to override the default mode, you can use this one. So now we're going to see how we can write to the database. So we are going to do this on our index because that's where our form is. Now, normally these will be on the different pages, but for this simple example, I'm just going to keep it as it is. So up here in our PHP tags, I'm going to add some lines and start by grabbing the data out of this form. So this is our form, this section, and we don't have any method, we don't have any action. So let's provide a post method. And for the action, by convention, we're going to open the PHP tags and echo HTML special characters that would take the server superglobal and then pass PHP underscore self. That would mean this same file, but this way we are avoiding possible attacks. So again, we always have to think security when we work with the server. So the method is post and the action is the same page. We have an input field here that the name is title and a text area where the name is body. So we want to grab these two and we want to check if the input submit is available on the post superglobal. So let's do this. We want to say if is set, if submit is set on the post superglobal, that means the form is submitted, then do something. Let's create our variables up here first. So title and body, and set it to an empty string. So down here, we can then set those variables to the data we get from the form. By the way, this is a shortcut in PHP to set variables to a value that they share. So in this case, title and the body have the same value. All right, so again, I want to check for another condition here. I want to say if not empty. So we're going to grab the post superglobal again and grab the title. Then if this is not empty, we will set this title to HTML special characters again and pass this post title. So again, security. All right. So if this is not empty, then set the title to the title that we get from the form. And we want to do the same thing for the body. So I'm just going to change all of these title text to body. We're not going to check for, errors if this was empty. In the previous video, we do that. And I just want to focus on PDO on this video. So we just want to say if it's not empty, then set these variables. Otherwise, just, don't do it. So now we want to actually write to the database and we want to check if these two are not empty, then add the data to the database. Let's do another check here. We want to say if not empty, so we're going to negate it and say title and the body. If the body and the title are not empty, then do something. So we can provide a try catch block here and try to write to the database. If not successful, catch the error. So let's catch the error first. So we're going to use PDO exception again and call it E, for example. So E is going to be an instance of the PDO exception class, and we just want to echo the message that we get from the get message method on that E object. In the try block, we can create our query. So let's call it add query, and it's going to be the MySQL query. So we want to say insert into posts table, and the title and the body column need to be filled in with these values. Now with MySQLi, we would come in here and add a title and the body directly. So that's fine, but again, that could open door to some potential attacks and security issues. But with PDO, we have something called a prepared statements where we prepare a MySQL statement and then execute that statement later on. So we have two ways of implementing it. One is using positional parameters by providing question marks that is a placeholder for the columns that we want to insert, and the other one is named parameters. So let's cover positional parameters first, and then I'll show you the named parameters. All right, so this is positional parameters, and we create our MySQL query, then we can create our PDO statement. So we want to create a statement and set it to connection again, and another function that is available on the connection object, which is an instance of the PDO class. And this prepare method takes the query we want to prepare. Now, this would give us the statement, which is a PDO statement, and we want to execute this one. This execute method on the PDO statement takes an array where the values inside the arrays are the placeholders we provided up here. So first one is going to be title, and the second one is going to be body. Now, the order of these parameters or these values are very important, because if I pass body here, then the title column will have the body, and it probably give us an error because of the length of the text. All right, let's see if this works. So this is the positional parameters with prepared statements, and we want to see if this works. So let's give it a refresh. Let's create a third post here, third post, and I'm just going to grab some of this text and add it here, press add. So we don't see anything here because the form and the post are on the same page, and you don't want to refresh the page because this will resubmit the form. We just want to press enter on the URL and we get third post. There we go. It's working. So let's do the same thing with the named parameters. I'm just going to copy paste that one and comment this out. And instead of question marks for placeholders, we use column and give it a name. In this case, title and body. So now we have named parameters. This is much better, especially if you have a lot of columns and you don't have to worry about the order, because now title is going to sit for title, body is going to sit for body. Preparing the statement is the same, but executing it is different. Instead of passing a simple array, we need to pass an associative array where the keys are our placeholders, named parameters, and the values are the values that we want to set. In this case, it's the title. We want to do the same thing for the body, right? So this is the only difference. So instead of question marks, we pass named params or parameters, and instead of executing and passing a simple array, we pass an associative array. Let's add another post here. So I'm going to refresh. Let's say fourth post. And again, I'm going to copy paste some text here and press add and press enter on the URL, and we get fourth post down here. Let's change the query. So I want to get an error. So let's say we want to write into a table that doesn't exist. So I'm adding another S to that table name, and I'm going to save it. And let's try to add something here. Press. We get base table or view not found. So of course we want to show these errors in a better way, or if we want to show it to the user, we want to say, for example, something went wrong, and then we handle it on the back end ourselves. But basically that's how you can connect to the database using PDO and read from it and write to the database with prepared statements. And for the last topic, I'm just going to talk about PHP strict types. So normally when we would create a function, we wouldn't specify the type of the parameters or the return type. Let's say I'm going to create a function up here, and let's call it add. It's going to take an x, and it's going to return x plus maybe 2 or 5, doesn't matter. And down here, I just want to echo that add and pass 5. So this should give us 7, of course. Up here we have 7. But if I pass a text down here, we will get a fatal error. Now we could enable the strict types in PHP by declaring it on the very top of our script. So it has to be the very first statement, and we want to use the declare function, set the strict types to 1, which means true. Now down here, I can come in and say this is going to be int, and the return type, I want it to be int as well. So we can specify the type of a parameter or a variable before the name. So just like this, and then the return type of a function by providing a colon after the parentheses and before the curly brackets, and then specify the type. So right now you can say this is giving me an error, and it says expected type is int, but we passed a string. So we need to pass an int. So this is the simplest example, and we can provide the type of any variable anywhere inside our classes or functions, or the return type of a function, just by adding the data type. So that's all the topics that I wanted to cover for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and it has been helpful. I want to thank you all for your likes, views, shares, and subscribes, and I'll see you at the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.